Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome panel 6 of DASICON 2017 on energy security, Karin Kneißl, Kirsten Westphal, Michael Rühle, Ferenc Suba, and the moderator Daniel Groß.
Thank you very much, and I want to first of all thank the organizers for inviting us to be able to talk about this important topic. And I want to thank the audience for the interests. We know that with this kind of perfect weather, you could also be skiing on a Saturday and nobody would blame you. So let me warmly welcome you to our panel today on energy security. I'm Daniel Cruz, and I am the Senior Program Officer who deals in the OSCE with energy security issues. We deal with renewable energy, with the protection of critical energy networks, with energy security dialogue. In the next 1.5 hours, we want to discuss with the distinguished panelists current and emerging issues in global energy security, the role of international organizations such as the OSCE, and what could be done in order to address, with the tools that we have, some of the issues that we will identify. Please keep in mind that this discussion, we would like to have it more of an academic nature. I think that fits this house. So I think the views that I will express are not necessarily the official views of the OSCE, but we want to have an open discussion with our experts. And so I'm going to kick off with a short introduction of our panelists. So you know, I know you've seen them in the booklet, but I think it's kind of nice if I say a couple of words. Right next to me on my left is Karin Kneißl. She is an independent researcher and lecturer, vice president of the Austrian Society for Politico-Military Studies, STRATEC. And she's teaching on the Middle East, on energy issues, on international law at renowned institutions such as the European Business School in Hessen, here at the Diplomatic Academy, and the Austrian National Defense Academy, and many more. And Karin Kneißl is a very renowned expert on international energy markets. She appears on television. I've seen her on Bloomberg. She knows everything about OPEC, so we're very fortunate to have her today. On my right, we have Kirsten Westphal. She is based at the Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik in Berlin. That is the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. It is, I think, the #1 think tank in Germany that works closely with the German federal government, but also with companies, advising them on a wide range of security topics. Previously, she's worked as a consultant in international energy relations and EU external energy policy. She has written many books on global energy governance and recently on Russian and Ukrainian energy politics and hydrocarbon resources in the Arctic. Michael is joining us today from NATO. He is the head of the energy security section in the Emerging Security Challenges Division in NATO's international staff. Previous to that, he was the head of speechwriting, senior political advisor in the NATO Secretary General's Policy Planning Unit. And before this assignment, he was the head of the Policy Planning and Speechwriting section in NATO's Political Affairs Division. He holds an MA in Political Science from the University of Bonn and is widely published in international publications such as the European Security and Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, Russia and Global Affairs, and so forth. Very impressive. We're very happy to have him. Ferenc Suba is joining us today. He is the executive director of the Energy Pact Foundation, and that is an NGO that recently moved to Vienna from Budapest and Geneva. No?
Geneva.
Only from Geneva. And it focuses on cybersecurity. And we're very happy to have him on this panel because not only is he a leading cybersecurity expert who has provided strategy advice to governments on how to protect themselves better from cyber attacks, but he has also led the implementation of these strategies that he has devised. And as I can tell you from my previous life as a consultant, that is very rare. So very happy to have him. Just for instance, to tell you a little bit about him, he has also been the management board, part of the management board of the European Network and Information and Security Agency.
The vice chairman.
Vice chairman. And he helped establish the global and European cybersecurity information platform. So let's get into the discussion. And I would like to start with a short question for each panelist and would like to ask you to respond also with a rather short statement of 5 to 10 minutes. And I would like to begin with Michael. Michael, if you could please tell us from your view, what are the major energy security challenges in the OEC region and what are the major instruments that we could meet them?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here and on such a wonderful sunny day. I would say there are three major issues that sort of dominate the energy discussion, I guess, in Europe as far as it's relating to security. One is, of course, geopolitics, which is part of energy, whether you like it or not. The idea that energy is also a foreign policy tool, and in particular, if there's a monopoly supplier of oil, gas, whatever, the fear that this supplier can use its monopoly as a political instrument against the consumers. And the second point is then the flip side of that, dependence. The fear of the consumer of being victimized economically. He has to pay maybe a higher price because he's at the mercy of the producer. Politically, that he has to make concessions that the producer asks from him. And even militarily, when you think of the role of energy, for example, in the Ukraine crisis as part of the hybrid warfare toolbox. So dependence, I think, is another problem that we need to look at. And the third one, and I think this was already mentioned in several panels, and especially this morning, is infrastructure vulnerability. You have cyber threats, which have been discussed, terrorism, piracy in maritime routes. You have natural disasters. The more you have, for example, renewables coming in, smart grids also come in, which we've heard this earlier, increase the risks, even down to the refrigerator who goes berserk and attacks the network. So what are the solutions? In a very broad brush, I would say the first is, and this is always sort of the key, the ideal solution is to build trust, to have a security dialogue that includes energy between suppliers and consumers and transit countries, ideally, to have maybe norms that will be adhered to by everyone concerned, maybe even confidence-building measures. The second, and in my view, perhaps the overriding thing, is promoting diversification of supply. More competition, lower prices, because you have more suppliers coming in, thereby diffusing the nervousness of many countries who feel that they are too dependent on one supplier. And the third point would be the exchange of best practices on infrastructure, of critical energy infrastructure protection, because diversification, as I just said, also leads to new challenges. If I diversify away from gas pipelines and go to liquefied natural gas, I need less to worry about pipelines, but then I worry about sea lanes. So in other words, for every positive development, there may be another security vulnerability opening. So having best practice exchange, having training and education, not only for operators, but also for people who deal with energy in the broadest sense, military diplomats and so forth. That, I believe, is all very useful. It overall reduces the nervousness that is often that we often observe when it comes to energy discussions in the OSCE area, and I think it overcomes some of the distrust that is still inherent, I think, in some energy relations. So if we go down that route, I think we will take the sting out of the energy weapon, as some people used to call it, and I think that would be very beneficial for everybody concerned.
Maybe as a quick follow-up question, I mean, you have spent a lot of time of your career at NATO, and if you look at energy security, let's say 20 to 30 years ago, and compare it to now, what has changed in terms of the perception, the threat perception, and how you respond to it?
I think the fact that NATO only took energy security as a subject on its agenda around 2008, after the first Ukraine-Russia gas crisis in 2006, already shows what has changed. The fact that NATO has enlarged and therefore has now countries in its ranks that have, that come out of the Soviet era and therefore have brought along the vulnerabilities from the Soviet era. That, I think, has changed a lot in terms of how energy is being discussed. In addition, of course, other changes like, for example, geopolitical changes such as the fact that through fracking the United States became a gas exporter rather than an importer, or the fact that the low oil price forces countries puts tremendous pressure on producers in the Middle East. All these issues are now, I think, have to be fed into any broader discussion on security, any broader assessment on the security landscape. This means energy and security, I think, are linked in many more ways than, let's say, a 1973 oil embargo. It's much more than that today. And energy segues into cyber, into maritime security, into terrorism. So I think a security organization that wants to be a 360-degree security organization has no other choice but to look at energy as well.
Thank you. And Michael just mentioned cyber as an emerging field and a connection between cybersecurity and the vulnerability of the energy sector. We have heard this morning, I think, a very fascinating panel discussion about cybersecurity. And I think one thing that we have to keep in mind, whatever the future of our society will be, and given these three technological innovations that are on the horizon, and I would add maybe digital currencies could be also another interesting factor. Without electricity, without energy, all of this doesn't work. You can't even launch a cyber attack without electricity. So we are very interested to hear from you a little bit more about your work in energy security and cybersecurity, and what you think has changed and how governments can effectively address these emerging challenges.
Okay, so thank you for the word. So in my earlier life, I led 8 different national working groups that were related to the coordination of a national system of cybersecurity. One of them was energy, and that's how I came into this field. Because before that, I was the founding director and also the general manager of CERT Hungary. So I was a type of guy who has just a law degree and also a Master of Arts degree from Heidelberg. And through regulation, I came into this field. And at that time, it was just a simple ICT-related, very technical subject. That was back in 2004. By now, by 2017, it has become really a matter of diplomacy, a matter of strategical decision-making. And I was lucky enough to follow this whole, let's say, evolution of the project or this process as I was also the vice chairman of a newly established European agency called ENISA back in 2004. And until 2016, I could hold this position. Now, to talk about the matter, I think the energy cybersecurity is the hot potato of today, because what you see is that the traditional ICT-related problems that are, let's say, really heavily burdening the proper operation of network operators, of IT services, are now entering into the area or sector of energy. And this sector is just simply not prepared for that. Because if you look at who does what in this field, in the energy sector, you will see that they are mostly somewhere scattered around physical security or IT-related fields at a very low level. And I think by now we have come to the conclusion that politicians and also think tanks and also CEOs became aware of this problem. So they are now thinking about that, and they also have the correct, let's say, keywords like we need to establish a CERT, or we need to establish a national cybersecurity center, and so on. But they do not know what is the real solution to that. Meaning, we have to, on one hand, combine a workforce that is dealing with OT, so operational technology, and also with IT, so information technology. And these are two different worlds, two different priorities, two different sets of skills and knowledges. And this is, I think, the first challenge that we have to face. The second big challenge is that the regulation that we have already at hand is just simply not up to the challenges and vulnerabilities that are quickly evolving every day. So the regulation that we have now as a kind of recommendation on the government side, how to deal with energy cybersecurity, became already obsolete by the time they have been published in the Official Gazette. That's, I think, a great challenge, how we can, keep pace up with these rapidly evolving changes. The third thing is that cybersecurity and also energy networks do not stop at the borders. If you just think about the electric grids, so the national grids that are keeping up the balance of electricity nationally, they are always interconnected right from Ukraine up to Portugal. And if one national transmission operator falls out, then it will be felt somewhere else. Just to give a concrete example, if the Hungarian transmission operator falls, meaning it cannot properly keep up the balance in the Hungarian network, then Portugal will also feel it. And this, of course, requires, on one hand, a new collaboration of the technology providers, meaning transmission operators, meaning electricity producers. They need to think about, let's say, collaborating with their own concurrents, with their own competitors. And the second, let's say, aspect of this type of interconnectedness is that also the states need to collaborate better, on one hand, with each other internationally, on the other hand, also with their energy private sector industries. Meaning we need new types of PPP platforms where they can exchange effectively, on one hand, information pertaining to the CEO level, and also effective operational information pertaining to the operators level. And this is, I think, still things to be done. And the, I think, third thing that is still lacking is the, let's say, relevant workforce in this field. Meaning we don't only need OT and IT guys being, complex put together, but we also need good energy cyber diplomats, really. I mean, those people who can talk about this in a meaningful language in an international context. This is still lacking, I think. So we don't have the people who can, on one hand, understand this subject well, but on the other hand, can also talk to the people at the C level and also at the decision-making level. Plus, we also need, I think, new institutions who can give more flexible, let's say, frameworks for collaborations. So that's why I think NGOs like the Energy Pact Foundation, who's now just recently moved to Vienna from Geneva, and just 2 weeks ago organized a very successful high-level conference together with the Austrian government and also with the inclusion of different high-level business representatives from all over the world and also from ambassadors from all over the world, was, I think, a good first step into that direction. That on one hand we need internationally and also nationally those NGOs that can deal with this task, putting the business and also the political players together at one table and also talk about this problem in a meaningful language.
Thank you very much. Next, I want to move on to Karin Kneißl, who is a defender of free markets, I think, and who has pointed out to us in the previous discussion that we had outside that, well, maybe institutions don't matter, it's private companies that matter when shaping the future of energy. In the OSCE area or in the world in general, of course, you have different interests which depend on your viewpoint, whether you are a producing country, whether you are an importing country or a transit country. I would be interested, Ms. Kneißl, if you could help us to define common interests in energy security in the OSCE area. How would you do that?
Well, it's a mission impossible because even so, the OSCE rightly considers itself as a true marketplace, as a true forum of dialogue where producers, consumers, and above all transit countries meet and interact. I would say there were easier times, maybe 15 years ago, when you could undertake this dialogue. But over the few years, and you have in this context at length discussed why dialogue has become more delicate inside the OSCE. But also we are back to the old fundamental laws of supply and demand. Geopolitics, with all my due respect, and it's the field I actually opened my own interest into the oil field, but we are more and more back to oversupply, to peak in demand, I would say. I was raised, socialized in the spirit of oil, that we are running out of oil, we will see a peak in supply. That's how I was brought up over the 70s and 80s. You might still remember from history the famous Club of Rome report of 1972, which took at its center of message limits to growth, which was an important gate opener for political parties such as ecological parties, etc. But right now what we see is we are not running out of oil. We have an oversupply. Conventional oil is, unconventional oil and gas is among that, but not only. And I would focus much more on the aspect of peak in demand. We might see over the next 10, 15 years that we are not running out of oil, but we are back to the situation of an overabundance of oil. And this then again will trigger some geopolitical problems, especially for countries which are highly dependent on oil production, such as those in the Gulf. Since you have mentioned my passion for market forces, I think that within the OSCE, and I wouldn't blame OSCE as the only forum where this happens, it's even worse inside EU institutions, there is this obsession that governments, that policies can be framed. In the end, it's always the decision of a company. I had the chance to meet Rex Tillerson, the former CEO of Exxon, who is now Secretary of State of the new US administration. I'm very curious to see how he will be acting as somebody who comes from this free market world, very much in this oil sector. But we see we see companies taking decisions, whether they will drill somewhere, whether they will not drill, how they conceive their energy mix. And this is the case even in a country like the People's Republic of China. Many years ago, I had the chance to interview some of the energy experts within the Reform and Development Commission, and I asked them, who inside your commission is in charge of deciding on the energy mix, and they said we follow the decision-making of the companies. So it's also there, the companies that decide where they will drill, with which technology, where they go, where they prefer to abstain. And I think this is sometimes overestimated by people inside the academic world, but also inside the diplomatic world, that senior government officials can really show the direction where the energy mix should move, where we should drill, where we shouldn't drill. And in order to be part of realism, it's always important to also listen to the companies and see how the companies will act. A current example at stake is, of course, also what kind of changes might we see in the transport sector. More than 60% of daily oil consumption production goes into the transport sector. The German energy transition, as some people rightly say, is not an energy transition, it's an electricity transition. We're speaking here of 30% of the energy mix that are to be redesigned. And also in the German energy transition, we have to say it's not so much about energy generation that is the challenge, it's much more about energy transmission. So we are back to the fragile sector of the grid. And in what will happen in the transport sector, new technology of mobility, that is the name of the game right now, I would say. And there I come back to my expectation. We are much more in a situation of peak in demand and not peak in supply. And here, decision makers from the public sector, whether it's governments, whether it's academics, should observe and maybe wait for a moment what will innovation surface in a few years, because we shouldn't repeat mistakes from the past when we tried energy saving by changing the bulbs and over-regulating a market instead of waiting for new technologies. And here I'm curious to see what will be then all the geopolitical implications of new forms of mobility.
So, Michael, since that also was a little bit addressed to your initial statement, just to modify a famous quote by a former American president, it's the private sector, stupid. Geopolitics is not the most important thing. How would you respond to that?
Well, it depends on whom you talk to, but I agree absolutely with Ms. Kneißl that indeed institutions have a tendency to believe that they can shape things much more than they actually can. This is true I think, for many institutions, not just for OSCE or NATO. It's an endemic issue. And indeed, this is an issue, energy is an issue where the private sector is really very much in charge. I often felt reminded of, since you quoted, I'm quoting someone else, Ephraim Kishon, the Israeli humorist, who said that God created two disasters for mankind, marriage and taxes, because both force you to cheat. I always thought that energy is the third one, because the amount of cheating that's going on in this realm is tremendous. You know, we pretend we can shape something when in reality somebody else is shaping the stuff. We use all kinds of statistics where you never know whether they're objective or whether some energy company or some think tank has, made a few changes, cosmetic changes to it about future gas demand, about future oil demand, and God knows what. So I'm quite aware of the limitations of the trade. So it's all the more important, at least from my point of view, that when we play a role, we try to play a role in energy security, for example, as NATO, that this role fits organically into what the institution can do. In other words, does it fit into our toolbox, and does it make sense? We should never pretend to do things that we actually cannot. But last point, it's interesting, nevertheless, to see, for example, that energy companies come to NATO, for example, to exchange notes on the situation in areas where they are physically present, because NATO may also be physically present there. So, there is a logic, I think, in dialogue without ever implying that, we do more for energy security than, I don't know, Statoil, SOCAR, or Gazprom.
Very interesting. We are witnessing something in the world today that we could maybe term integrations in different blocks in a way for the energy sector. We have the Eurasian Economic Union, we have the Shanghai Cooperation, we have the energy community, we have things going on in Latin America, of course. Kirsten, since you have written this fantastic paper that I just want to advertise on energy security and the OSCE, looking at these issues, I would be very much interested in your view on what concrete areas the OSCE could focus on with our capabilities as a platform for dialogue to promote cooperation on energy security from this zone that we can call Vancouver to Vladivostok. It's a huge area of 57 participating states, so I'd be very much interested.
Yeah, Daniel, thank you very much. I will try to a little bit point to what I think the OSCE could do, but if you allow, I would like to pick up what Karin Kneißl and Michael Rühle said, because I don't think that there is really a discrepancy in it. Because on the one hand, I think we have this kind of market realities, where of course we have now the oversupply and we see demand peaking, at least in the OECD world. It's very clear that we have this huge trade shift into, I would even say, Indo-Pacific and the MENA region, where you have the new growing demand centers for, oil, gas, but also electricity. So my experience of looking at the market developments from this kind of foreign and security policy angle, what we do in Berlin is that, especially for the whole broader European region, there is really, over the last years, you had this, on the one hand, market reality with quite relaxed, well-supplied natural gas markets, oil markets with relatively low prices. But on the other hand, you had this political alertness, the political perception of a crisis looming, really very much, of course, related to the geopolitical crisis that we face in Ukraine. And Crimea and so on. So you have this kind of separate realities, and this is kind of course, a challenge for politicians to somehow marry this or deal with that. And so this would be my first remark. I think we have to be aware that there are two arenas which in best cases would fit. And then I would also say, yes, I would also hope that we have free and liberal markets. But to me, at least, there are some question marks, because all the companies you mentioned are, for example, state companies. So you have a direct influence by the state. Well, Statoil is a completely different animal than Gazprom, or I think the other one, Soka, you mentioned, or you could mention the Chinese companies. So we have a growing, even influence of state companies in the traditional oil and gas sector. So I think this is a challenge where we have to see, we have the market, but on the other hand, we do really see mercantilist approaches growing. That would be one of my readings from if I see the Chinese deals for loan for oil swaps and these kind of things, where it will be interesting to see how this plays out in the future. And the other thing is, of course, if we really take climate change seriously, and if we really see we want to address the 2 degrees centigrade target, then we have to react quite quickly. And I don't see really the market delivering. So on the other hand, this is really a challenge for politicians. And then you have the other sectors really coming in, like renewables, energy efficiency, and electricity. So I would say we should take a broader view, and also, my point was, let's look to the interconnections between the two spheres. What could the OSCE do then? And I think, I would say one of the arguments we are doing in the team of authors is really, I think the OSCE is in a unique position to deal exactly with these different realities, to also deal with the reality that we're facing, and that you mentioned, Daniel, that we have more or less 2 integrative blocks emerging in Europe. So we have on the one hand the European Union with the energy community trying to really enlarge its realm of jurisdiction with the energy acquis communautaire, and Ukraine is really, I think, one of the major test cases for this approach. And on the other hand, you have the Eurasian Economic Union, which is a bloc still in development. And the outcome is what we've seen in the past is most of the disputes we've seen are coming from this kind of regulatory technical fault lines, that we do have corridors, natural gas corridors, but also electricity lines that cross over these 2 blocks. And what we were thinking when looking to that, you really see that most of the disputes are emerging on these regulatory fault lines or in these gray zones where it's not clear which of the rules and the norms do apply. And I think there the OSCE is really uniquely positioned to provide a dialogue platform to engage in exchange on a minimum set of rules. I'm not talking about developing huge over-regulated markets, but really just to identify minimum kind of exchange. And I also would like to emphasize that I don't see really a role for OSCE as long as markets run smoothly. But as soon as we see kind of disputes emerging, then the OSCE, I think, is fully fledged with its toolbox like early warning, prevention and mitigation, crisis management, and also the OSCE has a field presence. And if you strengthen this kind of energy focus, I think this would really help to that. And my last point is really this kind of, if you think into a next step, more sustainable energy system, then this is very much about expanding energy efficiency methods. It's about renewable energy, and then it's very much about electricity. And then I think the whole idea of the OSCE of connectivity gets a new connotation and is very important for the overall region as kind of, also providing, for example, a platform for private and public stakeholders.
Well, talking about sustainability and adding renewable energy to the energy mix, I think that is a little bit of a global movement almost, but many challenges remain. I would be interested, Ferenc, to hear from you in your assessment, adding more renewables to the national energy mix, does it create more insecurities in terms of...
For example, electricity to the national grid, then these are the weakest points at the moment. If you look at the whole ecosystem of the electricity networks in our region. And that's why I think we really have to somehow, on one hand, educate them. On the other hand, we also have to enable them, giving them incentives to invest more into the, let's say, protection technologies. Plus, we also need, I think, a kind of, let's say, new approach from the transmission operators, that they also should somehow strengthen and harden these endpoints from their part.
I mean, if we take, for instance, the transmission operator in Hungary, I mean, does he spend significant amounts of the budget on cybersecurity?
That's a very nasty question, I think.
Or let's say, do you think it's enough?
Just to be serious. So every transmission operator neglects right now the endpoints. This is my. So if you talk to people from the ENSOE, so ENSOE is the European network of transmission operators. I think they are the top-notch guys as regards cybersecurity in the energy sector, because they are really vulnerable. They feel this type of thing. But I think right now they are concentrating mostly on the inner networks, so their own problems, and they do not care too much about the, let's say, endpoint security of the consumers who are also producing electricity.
Karin, we have heard lots of interesting ideas. I think what the OECE could do in terms of dialogue and stuff, does that convince you? Do you think we have sufficient areas to maneuver in here?
No, it's what I really appreciate about some OSCE meetings I've attended is the wide variety of experts that OSCE is often able to assemble in workshops, to do training, for instance, also for ministries. I myself had the honor to act for OSCE in Turkmenistan several times, and then it's really good to have this address book and to give the cloud of OSCE as a kind of neutral, disinterested. It's not a company, it's not a government, it's not an NGO behind. And to do training, to bring a certain expertise into the field. That is very, very useful. And for all that, I really have my sincere respect for what OSCE workshops, meetings, bringing together people from very different backgrounds who otherwise wouldn't meet in such a forum. So this really is the comparative advantage of OSCE meetings when it deals with energy and environmental issues. So here it's really, we are back to exchange of expertise, free-minded, unlimited talk, which is the essence of diplomacy. Always remain in some sort of talking to each other and don't stop talking. But for instance, I remember very well one OSCE meeting I attended in Turkmenistan in 2010. You see various Western European countries represented by diplomats and sometimes also by companies. But for instance, those who make today major changes in the energy area on a global level, the Chinese, you don't see them there. The Chinese wouldn't attend a gas conference in Ashgabat. They simply build a pipeline at the same time while we meet there and discuss. You all remember maybe the famous old project, which always remained a project, called Nabucco, a gas pipeline from somewhere. Nobody ever knew where it would really start, northern Iraq, Iran, Turkmenistan, into the West. It was a 10-year project. The Chinese companies built during these debates, whether it was OSCE framework, whether it was EU framework, they simply built a pipeline in exactly 9 months, where we had exchange of ideas for 10 years. So it's nice to meet. Again, I don't want to underestimate. I'm the first one to subscribe to let's remain in dialogue, but we should never ever risk of losing the image. You have to be taken serious. it's a harsh world outside there.
Very, very interesting. And fortunately, we have somebody who is deeply involved with the Nabucco project in the audience. Maybe we'll get a reaction to that later.
Excuse me, may I just add one?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for your diligent heading. To react to what Christian Westphal said on national and international oil companies, I know that there's often this kind of reproach in the room, while Gazprom is just a subsection of the Kremlin and it's completely interacted. Let us not forget that whenever Total runs into a problem in Western Africa, the Élysée will act.
Yeah, sure.
When you did a very marvelous task as a chief of cabinet in the French government, you will be rewarded by pantoufler. You change your boots, you change your pantoufle, you go to Total in order to make good money for the next 5 years. BP, we all know when we had the tremendous scandal in the Gulf of Mexico, President Obama then made a dramatic speech in the Oval Office calling BP British Petroleum, even though the official name since 2003 has been Beyond Petroleum, because this company wants to appear as an energy company with a sunflower, etc., and not just as a dirty fossil company. But Obama called it British Petroleum in order to say, you, Britain, you're responsible for what is happening in your ex-colony, the US. So there was a deep political dimension to the whole thing. And BP would have never been let down by the British government, even so it's a stock-listed company. And I remember the CEO of Royal Dutch Shell then even saying, well, BP, they don't know how to do offshore drilling. We know it. Maybe BP will be for sale. You would never see BP for sale because you have a tremendous amount of pension funds inside BP. I mean, it plays a crucial social political role for the BP social security system. So yes, Gazprom is all national oil companies. You have better and lesser well-functioning ones. Saudi Aramco has become very professional over the years, while PDVSA has become very dysfunctional over the years. And you have highly professional people inside the international oil companies, like in the national oil companies. And no international oil companies is acting without vested interests from the governments.
Michael, I would be interested, Karin just said that maybe we are too slow and the Chinese are just doing things while we're still talking for the next 10 years. How do you at NATO engage with China, and how do you see that this problem?
Well, we don't engage with China on a regular basis, and certainly not on energy, because we're not an energy institution. We had hoped, at least I had hoped, that our presence in Afghanistan, which is at the border of China, would have led to more Chinese curiosity about NATO, and that we would have more interaction. But we had staff-to-staff talks on a sort of annual basis, but that covers more regional security issues, not energy. I think it would look odd also from a Chinese perspective if we would suddenly try to engage them in an energy dialogue. And given the geopolitical issues I mentioned earlier, I don't think, even if you would try that, I cannot imagine that NATO would speak with one voice on energy when you think about the different energy interests and the different situations in energy situations within NATO, let alone within the OSCE. So no, we are. This is a very low-key relationship, which I personally would have liked to grow, but I think from the Chinese side they're very cautious. And of course, the Chinese would argue, as do the Indians, for example, which we also engaged. We have good relations basically with all individual NATO allies, so why should we get into a structured dialogue with, or a structured relationship with NATO proper? So you can see this as a positive or a negative sign, but energy is really not a part of this story.
Would you also like to react to that?
Yeah, I mean, I take what Karin Kneißl said. I think this. I try to make this point. You have always politics interfering in this market relations, but I also would share the view that leave to the market what the markets is, and really the energy markets are as we have in the EU, really the approach to, and Germany I think is a very special case, really relying on fully liberalized markets. So leave it to the companies. They are the first instances to provide energy security. And to deal with other companies to secure the supplies. But then on the other hand, there are these other layers where politics, where international organizations do have a role to play. And I think Michael already explained what NATO does. I think for the exchange with China, for example, or India, these upcoming emerging or already there centers of energy demand, we have the IEA. And the IEA, the International Energy Agency, has been very successfully reaching out to these big players in Asia. And I think this is like kind of the IEA's role to supplement what the NATO does on the security level. So IEA looks into strategic petroleum reserves, exchange into energy statistics. So we do have that kind of mechanisms. I think the point we have to admit here, especially in the Northern Hemisphere, from Vancouver to Vladivostok, is that we lack a forum to really discuss upcoming energy issues. We don't have an idea. We had a number of crises where geopolitics interrelated with energy crisis, but we are not really aware of where are energy risks looming. So I think a mapping of really critical energy nodes, infrastructure points would be really a thing and a task to look into. And this was the point why we thought OSCE could play a role. Because we don't have a forum to really engage, for example, with the Russians on energy issues right now. Because Energy Charter Treaty does not really function any longer, that the Russians stepped out. And I don't see, with all the geopolitical crisis looming, I don't see the atmosphere to really create new institutions. So we have to look into what do we have and where could we expand and engage and just provide a platform to meet and engage. And I think NATO has a role, but OSCE has also a role to play.
Yeah. Okay, now we have about half an hour for questions and answers. I think we'll take 2 questions at a time. Please briefly introduce yourself. Please ask a concise question so we can take as many as possible, and let us know who you would like to answer. So, we have somebody with a microphone, I think, over there. I see you first.
Yeah, hello, my name is Wolfgang Sporrer. We used to work in energy business for a while. And I want to comment and ask a question to Mrs. Kneissl, who talked about this kind of fault line between business and government. On the one hand, politicians and diplomats. On the other hand, there's businessmen who are driven by the desire for their bottom line. And but there is a huge interaction because politicians, they create a regulatory framework, they create a tax framework, they do conclude intergovernmental agreements, or they do not. So basically, they're interdependent, but they do not speak the same language. And this is one of the biggest problems. Politicians and diplomats are generally, I'm now in a position to speak freely, considered a bit annoying with their interests and geopolitical strategies. Whereas the companies are usually assessed as a bit selfish and not idealistic as they should be by the side of the politicians and diplomats. And this is very often because they pretend to have the same interests, but they do not have the same interests. They are thrown in a boat which is kind of vaguely based on some interests, but in fact they have completely different interests. An energy company may pretend that their largest goal is the diversification of supply. Their largest goal will always be their bottom line because that's how it's supposed to be. That's how it's supposed to be in the markets. And I think if there could be a forum where diplomats and politicians on the one hand and business people on the other hand learn to speak the same language and be honest about their interests, which are very often really overlapping. This is what is good. I think that would be a real step forward. And I think when the word dialogue comes, the second thought is always OSCE. So that would probably be a role. diplomats, politicians, businessmen together and learn each other's language.
Thank you for this interesting reaction. Over there, right?
Thank you. My name is Alexis Seibt. I'm a management consultant and student here at the DA. My question would be, it was quite interesting to see that energy autonomy wasn't featured that prominently now in the talks. So the strive for energy autonomy by many countries, and soon maybe China as well, might that actually lead to even stronger crisis in developing markets like Russia, Middle East, etc.? Thank you.
Who would you like to respond?
OSCE and NATO representatives would be a great fit, I think.
A slide towards...
Autonomy.
I didn't catch the second.
Autonomy. Energy autonomy.
Yeah, would you? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've always refrained from using the word autonomy because we are in an, I mean, it's a platitude, it's a common place. We're in an interdependent world. And I remember Henry Kissinger in 1974, I always called him the first green politician, green not for ecological conviction, but for geopolitical conviction, because he said we have to be energy autonomous, we have to be less dependent on the Arab world, which put us into this difficult situation of 1973. But to be energy autonomous, I mean, you have to go back to pre-Middle Ages, where you're sitting behind your palisade fence in a small village. There's nobody in this world who can be energy autonomous. And definitely not in the electricity sector, because we have transnational grids that stretch over the Mediterranean, over the North Sea. So I know that it's a catchy word, and some political parties like to campaign with it, but it's the wrong word. We can be maybe a little bit less vulnerable, but in the end, we're all vulnerable, and we're interdependent.
Yeah, maybe I would add that I don't think that this reflects the state of current commodity markets. I think it's a market of heavily trading, and if you buy it somewhere cheaper, you buy it somewhere cheaper. And I think that's always going to be like that, and I think that's a good thing. But Michael, or
I mean the same. I think energy autonomy is not a real target to strive for in order to cut ties. I think we have all profited from this, sharing labor, but also coming from Germany, like the Ostpolitik, the gas pipe deals, there's something in it to also exchange and rely on trade. So if you really try to diminish the density of economic ties, I think this also decreases, the barrier to deteriorate international relationships. So I adhere to this focus that it helps for rapprochement, it helps for cooperation. But I think your point was also slightly different, because if we go for a climate-changing world, if we want to have more sustainable energy systems, then we might really find ourselves in a world that is more based on energy efficiency, renewable energies, which I agree would have a completely different energy geography. So in Europe, we would have super grids, maybe relying more on solar panels in Spain or whatever. And you pointed then, what does happen to these big conventional suppliers? And I think this is a very valid point. And I think we don't have answers to this yet. So I think there is a real challenge within that track of the Paris Agreement to look into new development models for exactly these states. But I think we don't have the appropriate answers yet, because if I look to the Middle East, if they look into diversification of economies, it's mostly relying on cheap feedstock for petrochemical industries or whatever. So in a carbon-constrained world, it's really a challenge for these countries.
Maybe here.
I just wanted to make a point, I think, that the gentleman left about the different language between the private sector and diplomacy or whatever. I can only sympathize. Just a small example, after Crimea annexation, I had a discussion with the guy who works for a German energy company that works mainly with Russia. And I come from hard security, and I also believed in OSCE principles. that should not be violated. And I had the feeling after half an hour that for him, nothing has happened. As long as the gas flows and as long as he makes money, it's fine. And I felt that I was on a different planet, because I look at it from the principle side of things. He looks at it from the money side of things. And Russia remains a reliable supplier, and Ukraine remains an unreliable supplier or a transit country. Hence, for him, the issue is clear. For me, it was not, or is not, because I'm looking at it through a different lens. And I realized that indeed there's a lot of talk we still have to do when we really want to speak with the same language. I doubt that we ever will. But it also makes, I would then say this is one of the many little anecdotes that makes me more skeptical about your point about interdependence and reducing tensions through dependence. On energy, there's no interdependence. We just want the energy, and we do whatever we need to get it. And I think that's not interdependence, that's something very, very different.
Yeah, but then you also need somebody who purchases it.
Of course, yes. But I mean, the idea that the producer will not do stupid things because it will, limit his profit. Well, every crisis that is related to oil or gas, I think the producer is apparently so stupid because he has a higher goal that he feels is more important than making revenues for a couple of weeks. He can stop a couple of weeks or months to have the revenues, as long as he has, he can follow some other goal that he finds is more important. So I think this idea that the producer and the consumer are interdependent, yes, they are in a theoretical sense, but in practical sense, I think the producer usually has the upper hand. And this is one of the reasons why there's so much nervousness, especially in the eastern part of Europe, about the energy relations there.
And many times he has shareholders that are pressuring him, of course. I think over here we have a question in the very front.
So Richard Harknett from Oxford currently. I wanted to pick up, Kirsten, on your point at the end. You mentioned this notion of energy risk, right? And that we need to sort of map this more. So I wonder if we could draw you out a little bit on that, and then Michael's point about separate lenses. So take whatever lens you want to filter that, and then if the moderator would allow, how the rest of the panel look at that notion of energy risk from whatever perspective they wish.
The idea of mapping energy risks is really basically looking to the cross-border infrastructure we're having, maybe really from Vancouver to Vladivostok. And they're really also identifying cross-border regulatory fault lines, gray zones, where we have already seen energy disputes emerging, but also to identify new risks. I think we are getting more and more clearly where the Eurasian Economic Union is heading to, and how the energy markets could function. So this is a kind of exercise I think that would be extremely useful to do that together, maybe basically on an OSCE level. But I think there is also the future perspective, because we mentioned China and the One Belt, One Road initiative, and I think this is really something where also looking at it from a European point of view and from a strategic point of view, this is something we should really think about. And look what this new, I think that brings in new dynamics, especially when you look to the corridors, because it talks about land-based corridors, it talks about sea lanes, and I don't think that everything will materialize, but I do think, yes, China is moving forward. And then, of course, I think with the Trump election, and we haven't mentioned that with the new administration, we do have a transatlantic dimension where we should talk about, especially when it comes to liberalized markets. We very much relied on US guarantees on sea lanes. We don't know how really America First doctrine would really play out in this direction. Who knows? I mean, I think it's very early to see, but I think there's really a necessity again to sit together, to have as much of dialogue as possible, I would say.
This would go, I think, beyond the remit of NATO, but just two small points. We have been reaching out very systematically to the IEA over the last several years. We've invited IEA people to come to exercises of NATO and vice versa, so that we can benefit from their database, especially, which of course is quite substantial. And also from their assessments. And just a few months ago, or a few weeks ago actually, we set up in NATO an intelligence division, which is supposed to enhance the intelligence sharing among allies across the whole spectrum of risks. And I think there will be 1 or 2 people in this division who will also be dedicated energy specialists. So while I doubt that they could do this kind of tremendous work, the idea that we look at where are future flashpoints is alive and well, and also we've enhanced our analytical capabilities in NATO, that we have now people who do quite daring, I would say, analyses about future flashpoints. And if this includes energy as a potential flashpoint, then so be it. So I think we try to be, spread a little wider, get expertise from other sources, not just from national intelligence services. And I think that's the way to go. And one last point, there's of course an inherent contradiction in the logic of the notion of intelligence sharing, because normally intelligence is what you keep for yourself. But now this morning I learned that we have CBMs in cyber defense, which I find quite amazing. I also thought this was a contradiction in terms. So I think we're trying out some very interesting new stuff.
Enough has been said on that.
Okay. One question over here.
Thank you. I'm a student at the Diplomatic Academy. My name is Daminov Ildar. I would like to ask you, how do you see in the OSCE framework the role of Central Asian countries, especially Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, for the energy security in the European Union area? I would address this question to Ms. Kneissl, and if you don't mind, Mr. Cruz as well.
Thank you very much. 2 countries I know a little bit, Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, are definitely part of the One Road, One Belt strategy mentioned by Christian Westphal beforehand. So the Silk Road doctrine of the People's Republic of China is not only an economic project, it's also a geopolitical project. It's about investment and political presence and co-shaping certain outlooks. So what I have observed over the past years, mentioning EU relations with import of gas, for instance, from Turkmenistan, pipelines and airlines have been turning east, not west, and will turn even furthermore east. I think there has been often a wrong assessment by the EU, that the EU market is so important. In my eyes, it's not that important. First of all, we have the unpredictable energy transition in Germany. What will really happen to the natural gas market? We see the prices go down, not only because of what is happening in terms of supply and demand, but especially in Germany, we have a completely blurred market. You have market economy rules for the conventional sector, and you have a planned economy for renewables. So to be a natural gas power station today in Germany is not easy. And to have some sort of prediction of what might happen, and above all, demand. What is happening to demand? The demand is in the east, it's in the southeast. So I believe that these 2 countries, especially Turkmenistan, with the 4th largest natural gas reserves on a global level, it will turn more east, southeast. And it will also be interesting to see what will happen to these old projects, which have often been frozen and reactivated, like Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline, TAPI, some other, the friendship pipelines. Turkmenistan definitely is a very, very difficult place to handle. And I know that many companies have been sitting there for years, and they closed their offices because they said, no way, we don't want to invest more nerves, more money. A few years later, they came back because they said, no, it's a force incontournable, we have to be here. Kazakhstan is easier to deal with on an official level because you have highly professional officials who know what they talk about. They master well English next to Russian and the other languages inside Kazakhstan. But I have deep respect for all the companies, and I'm back to the companies because in the end it's those who take the decision, yes, we will invest, we will be there. It's difficult. And Eni, which has the Italian international oil company, but of course Eni is also, as we have mentioned beforehand, powered by vested political interests in Rome. Eni was about to open, I think, please correct me, some 5-6 years ago, the big, what was the name of this field? Kashagan, was it Kashagan field, yeah. Then it was frozen because of some engineering problems and others. Now they are back, finally they are online with the project, but with these gas prices that you have today, it doesn't materialize as it was calculated in the office beforehand. So all my respect for those inside companies who have to have this economic and political breath to get something done. And that's very difficult in Central Asia, because your immediate competitor is China.
Okay. Question here in the back, gentleman over there.
Hello, my name is Andreas Will. I was working 3 years in Brussels in the European Commission, Directorate General for Energy. And I would have a question to the panel. How do you see the role of nuclear energy in the OSCE countries to secure energy security? Because we see here a lot of interdependencies, like in Hungary, the fuel for the Baksh power plant will be delivered by Russia. Then after Fukushima, we saw that some countries are retiring from nuclear energy. Others, like Czech Republic, are building new nuclear power plants. So I don't address that to a specific person of the panel. Perhaps you can give an answer on that, because we spoke about renewables, but I haven't heard a lot about nuclear, which has also political implications. China is building a lot of nuclear, UK as well. Perhaps you have some points on that.
Kirsten, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Maybe I try a general answer and then looking more onto the Russian deals, and then maybe say a word on China as well. I try. So my general point is really we shouldn't forget simply about the risks related to energy, nuclear energy, with all the proliferation and these kind of issues. So I think, and nuclear waste disposal. So in that sense, I'm very critical. I think that's very difficult to handle, especially with the new security threats we're facing with terrorism. So I think there is a real new dimension of nuclear. So you see, I'm very skeptical, despite of the fact of, well, climate issues and quite carbon-friendly technology. I wouldn't really like to see many of these countries going into nuclear, but they do. And I think this is, for me, the very astonishing thing in the EU for me is that we talk a lot about the supplies of Russian gas, but there's not that much talk about the nuclear deals Russia is striking, and this is something I think we do observe across the whole globe, that these are very much package deals, that it's not only nuclear constructing nuclear power plants, but it's the whole fuel cycle that Russia really provides for these countries. And it's also a kind of cycle with credits. It's normally a whole package with sometimes natural gas, but also arms deals. So it's kind of a very, again, state-dominated approach. And I think this is something to really look closer to it. So I'm grateful to this question. And then, yeah, you're right, China is a new actor in this scene. And it's still, to me, it's still, I don't have enough experience really on technology, but I don't see really how this country can really jump into providing a very modern and updated technology like the other big players, but obviously it's striving for, and I think this comes with all the related risks that I mentioned.
Okay, and I think we have time for 2 more questions. If we could maybe collect them, or maybe even 3 over there in the back.
Thank you. My name is Peter Schneider. I'm journalist and working in the fields of energy.
Sorry, we can't hear you. Can you speak up just a little bit?
Excuse me. My name is Peter Schneider. I'm journalist and working in the field of energy. So I'm surprised, and I'm not surprised, that some new technologies are not mentioned here in this forum. One of the most important is making energy from water by hydrolysis. The final product is HHO gas or Brown's gas. It was invented 50 years ago from a Bulgarian electrician. And it is used now, and Mr. from NATO will know it, from the United States Navy for driving the bigger ships with seawater. So you can use water and make of H2O, HHO gas, and this gas is working better than gasoline or better than any gas. Final product is steam. And meanwhile, it is used in a lot of cars and electro generators. So I would like to inform you about things which are not thematic in the universities and not used in our schools. But if you look in your computer for HHO gas or look at Google for Brown's gas, you will find a lot of these things, and you will see that you will never have any more wars for energy, no blood for oils, no gas pipelines, no oil pipelines, because water is everywhere. We live in a water planet, and this water is used as energy. It was mentioned by Jules Verne 150 years ago, and it's true now. And there are a lot of persons using it in South America, using it in North America, and you will find a lot of information which will change your world completely. Because water is not only water, it's a part of energy, and it can be departed with hydrolysis in HHO gas. HHO means 2H2O, water, and the formula will be well known and will be used in the future more than now. Thank you for the possibility to speak about this.
Okay. Let's just take 2 more questions, please. We had over there.
Yes, thank you very much so far. My name is Ansgar Fellendorf. I study here at the DA. First, I would just like to make a challenge real quickly what Karin Kneißl said about Germany being unpredictable, but then at the same time it's diversifying its energy market. So I thought this was a very simplified way to point out. My question is if any one of the panelists dares to make a prediction of our energy supply in 25 years, because energy is a large-scale, long-term investment, as we can see with pipelines, with renewable energies. So this would be my concrete question. Also saying that, well, the point about Germany and the focus on gas and oil was not completely clear to me. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Henry Ngosichev. I'm a graduate in international relations. I'm not a specialist in energy security, but I'm very much interested in the energy sector. I have 2 questions, short ones. First one is, don't you think that it's actually the posture and ideological component in the foreign policies of states that actually create this energy security problem? If you look at the Middle East and then you compare it to Russia, I don't understand why you cannot import gas from Russia, but you can import gas from Qatar or buy oil from Saudi Arabia and sell them weapons, etc., etc. So to me, I don't understand very well why it happens this way, if it's not the problem of ideology. The second question is, I like very much the perspective of Karin Kneißl on the private sector. So my second question is more addressed to you. Don't you think that the possibility and the active practice of buying patents for engines that work on water, for example, for car industry, or other patents with regard to renewable energy by gas, oil companies actually is another component of energy security that actually breaks the progress in the alternative ways of providing energy by other means, simply. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's get to it. Question number one was about fuel cell technology, hydrogen, its future role. Karin, you wanted to react.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Schneider, for your pointing out that. I was too brief in my first statement when I said a lot will depend on what happens in the transport industry, the automobile sector. And here I was, of course, thinking in the back of my mind of the hydrogen development, because you're fully right. I personally am not a partisan of the electric car and of the electric mobility, because as I've pointed out in the beginning, we already see here a tremendous drive of over-regulation, once again, undertaken by the European Commission and many other actors, while it would be much more interesting to see what kind of innovative products come out of the hydrogen sector. And here, interestingly enough, and sorry if I'm a bit critical once again with what is happening inside Germany, but interestingly enough, the German automobile industry, which is a tremendous employer and it has its role in the world economy, but a lot more is happening in South Korea, is happening in Israel, and even Italy and France when it comes to the hydrogen innovation. And here we might see, and this maybe bridges to the question of where might be the energy mix in 25 years from now. Yes, I do hope that with the innovation shifts that we will see in the automobile sector, everything goes with transport, that there will be this kind of revolution everybody has been waiting for decades. So here, hydrogen will definitely have its say. I'm pretty sure about that. Now in Germany, you see that Mercedes, in cooperation with Linde and Air Liquide, which has already been active in France, is going that way. And here, I hope that the private sector will work its way. And as the gentleman who asked the third question said, yes, companies in the past have often bought patents, licenses, and so on in order to preserve their market share in different fields. That's a fact. But I think that for various reasons, we will see changes there. The overstretched notion of fragmented world also will somehow affect the energy industry. We also might see here some fragmentation in terms of smaller actors. We have already seen that in the unconventional oil and gas industry, that they will have this comparative advantage of being smaller and acting, that they will make a certain change. I don't want to use energy revolution. It has also been overstrained as a notion many times. But there will be innovations here and there. They have to happen. And if it's only for the sake of creating new employment, because this is the major thing. I mean, when the SPD Green Party government in the early years of the 2000s, it was all about job and innovations through renewables. It didn't materialize the way its authors had thought, but I hope that there will be more employment created, because there will be more free market forces letting technology work and affect the automobile sector or the transport sector as such, because it's not just about, of course, about the automobile industry, it's transport as such.
So Kirsten, you want to quickly react to this, the market in 25 years question?
Yeah, I would be curious to see Germany's energy market in 25 years. But it's always fascinating to see how much Germany is, of course, a reference point also abroad. And And I would at least say what Germany has done something, because we paid the learning curve for solar panels, and the world is profiting right now. So we are, of course, doing mistakes on the forefront, but I think we are. It's a muddling through, but still, I think, I leave it with that commenting on the Energiewende. And I think what you said, Karin Kneißl, about is really a point. We don't know where demand is going to. Demand unpredictability is also due on the European Union's level, because we don't know where we find a consensus on the integrated energy and climate policies. And this is definitely really a challenge. I definitely agree. With respect to all the competition on the global level. And this is why we are not that attractive to the big producing regions that are looking into growth markets. But on the other hand, the question I really like, in 25 years, I think we can't really say that, but I would really also bet on technological breakthroughs. And I agree, maybe on hydrogen, I would also bet on a storage revolution, also for the electricity sector, which really would change the whole game, also like for the German ones, with all the issues around the grid would simply change if we have that kind of storage revolution. So I would bet on this. And a point to this ideology, yes, in a sense you're right. If you look to it through the market lens, I agree. There's a big challenge also in the Middle East, and if someone asked me what is the major security threat on the oil and gas markets, I would point to the Middle East, and maybe even to Netherlands, where we have the cap on production right now, and this is really a challenge for many European countries for reasons, and not Russia. But then looking at it from the broader perspective, I mean, yes, but Russia has challenged the security architecture in Europe. It has changed the borders, and this is also something to react. I'm not sure whether we should react, and I think I wouldn't agree to that. Really challenge Russia on the energy relations side, because I think we should keep that channel, but it's just the other kind of reality we have to see.
Michael, anything to add?
On this ideological issue, why can't we buy from Russia? We'll all buy from Russia, and we will continue to buy from Russia. This is not an ideological question. The question is on what kind of conditions do we buy from Russia? And if Lithuania, which is right next door to Russia, pays twice as much for gas as Germany, which is 1,000 kilometers away, then obviously something is wrong, at least from the viewpoint of Lithuania. So that's why, and this was mentioned in the first speech this morning, that's why the Lithuanians bought a floating LNG terminal. And they still buy stuff from Russia, but Russia discounted the price, because now they have a competition. Because whenever the price isn't right from the viewpoint of the Lithuanians, they can buy LNG from Statoil, from Norway. So they will still buy from Russia, but now Russia has to be more competitive. And that's why it's not ideology. I think it's what the Lithuanians, for example, did was extremely clever.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that will wrap up the session. I want to thank the panelists very much for their time and expertise. Let's give them a round of applause. And you can continue these discussions about pipelines and the Energiewende over lunch, I think. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Once more, an outstanding panel, I would say. We've recognized the importance of interconnectedness of energy security as an overall security challenge. Thank you, distinguished speakers, and Daniel Gross for moderating. Thank you. Now, dear guests, please enjoy either a traditional Wiener Schnitzel or real Italian pasta. And in addition, as a dessert, we have Kaiserschmarrn. We will start with our last panel, the OSCE in 2022, 2:45. Thank you.